Hello, hello. Welcome to the Becoming Zesty podcast. So glad that you are here. And if you're watching on YouTube, hello. Really glad that you've stopped by. Check out the show notes for the link there if you're listening and do want to watch. And welcome, because today we are going to be talking about selling to people how their brain hears and processes information. So this is obviously really important when we are in the world of persuasion. And when I talk about selling, what's interesting in leadership is that selling has so much more meaning, I feel like, when it comes to leadership. And in fact, I think that's part of when we broaden the definition of sales and what we're selling, I think it actually becomes so much easier to do so. And of course, that makes all the sense in the world that we would lean towards things that make it easier to sell things, because when we have something that we believe can help the world, that's the whole point, right? Like to sit and say, I have something that helps people, and then not actually get it in the hands of the people it's supposed to help, it's not doing its thing, right? And of course, there's challenges there and all that stuff. At the end of the day, the point of talking, doing stuff, influencing people is to get something across. So when it comes to selling, what is even, what would be the broader definition of sales? And for me, selling also includes the sale and the selling of ideas. So we sell our kids on eating vegetables. We sell our partner on the vacation we want to take, or the thing we want to do over the weekend, or how we should budget. We sell our clients on our packages. We sell our collaborative, co-business people on ideas. So when we look at it that way, every time that you are interacting with someone, there is more than likely both people are selling something, and one person's gonna walk away having sold the other person, and the other person will have bought, right? Like if someone comes up, like my sister can always sell me on things like boba and sushi, right? She's like, hey, want to get sushi? Right, what is she actually doing? She's just selling me on the idea of sushi. Now, in that example, it's such an easy sell that all she has to do is ask. So in sales, when it comes to business, selling your stuff, there's also the concept of it doesn't so much matter what you say every time, as long as you're willing to ask a whole bunch of people, right? You could be a terrible salesperson, but as long as you are willing to talk to and ask more people, hey, do you want this thing? Hey, do you want to do this thing? Hey, do you want this thing? That person will still win over somebody who's really, really good at persuasion, but sits at home and doesn't talk to anybody. So that's why it's so important to be like, if we think about sales in a more constructive way, more of us who have good things and are good salespeople can be out there actually doing our thing, and not be sitting at home with like imposter syndrome and am I good enough, and am I worthy to do, just like all the things. And so when we look at it that way, is we're like, if we're bothering to do anything, we're already in the game. So let's make it as effective as possible. So then this comes down to, how do we talk then to somebody in a way that their brain hears? So if we have kids that are picky eaters, how does their brain process information? How do they hear it? And how do we make things sound, feel, look good to somebody? Because when it comes down to it, the brain talks in senses. Right, that's why we have the 5 senses, plus the 6th is our self-talk. In NLP, that's known as AD, that's audio digital, hearing your own voice in your head. AT is hearing somebody else's voice in your head, like your mom talking or your dad. And so the brain processes through the symbolic representation of our world. And that's, of course, done through our senses and our self-talk. And so to explain that, we kind of can go back to childhood. A baby doesn't understand words per se, because it's the experiences that lead to the understanding of what things are called or named. So, right, the brain has to function to understand things symbolically. Otherwise, as a baby, there wouldn't be that start of the brain connections that give us the interpretation of the world. This is how the world works. When I cry, I get this. When mom does this, I do this. When dad does this, this happens. And so those are symbolically represented. Then we go to naming things. This feels like love, or this feels like sadness. So that is why when it comes to selling, when it comes to working with someone and communicating and selling from a place of how their brain works, we have to understand that the brain represents things symbolically. And so that's what we just talked about. And two is that people have preferences on those representations. Some people are very visual, and so it's images that generally will transmit a message and get a point across and be persuasive in someone's brain. Or maybe they're very auditory, they hear it and it needs to sound good. Or maybe they're very kinesthetic. It has to feel good in their body. Those gut feelings have to be aligned. It has to feel good to them. And so people have preferences in the things that get developed. You know, we have our native, our natural, what we are organically were designed and how we were created. So we have preferences there. Then there's programming preferences. So for me, I am very visual. Naturally, I'm very visual, but the other one that's very strong in me is AD, audio digital, and that is more from the programming of being in school forever and ever and ever, right? As an MD, like that's just what I did. And so thinking became very developed. And talking to myself became a primary mode. So you can have representations with you or somebody else that you don't totally always know which one's native and which one's programmed, but sometimes based on the history, things can kind of make sense. So when we are in a conversation and in a persuasive kind of sales thing, right? Like whether it's the kids to eat the veggies or we're on an actual sales call or a Zoom call to pitch our stuff, we can listen for the words that people are using when they talk to us, tell us what they actually process, what their brain processes through. And so when we listen for the words, and I'm going to go through examples here, we're going to go through the words that they say, and then we can also go through the words of what happens when you talk back to somebody who has that kind of representational system. Like, what is it that you need to say back? Okay, so what are we actually going to listen for when we're hearing stuff? Now, people in our lives that we talk to routinely, obviously, we can listen to it throughout their conversations, and we can get a really clear understanding of literally the order of all six, right? So some people really go with smells. They're like, oh man, when I smell that perfume, like they generally have perfume, they like body sprays, they are into scented, laundry detergent, whatever. So like smells can be big, and they can be like, when I smell this smell, it reminds me of my grandma. Or gustatory, that's the taste. When I eat these cookies, it reminds me of grandma. Or I have the craving and I imagine it and it reminds me of grandma. So when we are in our everyday life, it becomes easier because we have so many data points, right? You could listen to your partner or your kids for like an entire day and get a pretty clear sense of what's going on. And then of course over the years and things like that, you can see how someone may shift in how their brain represents information to them. What's interesting is that the more you work with your brain and do this kind of work, like anybody that comes to our level 1 for NLP certification and life coaching certification, or even our 2-day habit training, is that a lot of times as people work with their brains, they get better at using all of them. And so it becomes easier to like imagine, for for example, if you are wanting to create in the world a certain experience with your kids, and there's like a taste and a smell associated, like an experience, a birthday cake or something like that. Like I've had want to take my sister to Paris and have a chocolate croissant looking at the Eiffel Tower and things like that. Like that taste can, as you practice representing things in your mind, it gets built out. That was never really a thing that came naturally to me. And some people worry that they can't visualize. It is totally fine as long as you represent it first in your mind the way that you speak, and then do it for other people. What's cool is that you can develop all of these senses and communication within yourself over time, and it becomes even easier to work with yourself and others. So it's pretty cool that way, honestly. The brain is so incredibly plastic, and it does so many different things that we can really, really run with it. Okay, so what are the things that people are going to say? If they are visual, they will say things like, it appears to me that, I need to get a perspective on, or let's change the perspective about, they'll say, a hazy idea, this idea it's murky. Up front, I'm going to be up front with you, paint a picture for you. Let me paint a picture for you with my words, right? I can see about that. Parents, a lot of time, right? We'll see about that. Can we do this? Oh, we'll see about that. So you can hear in even some of your partner's conversation, what it's easier to see outside of yourself, I think, than inside. But you can also, once you start listening for this in others, you can hear it in your own speech. So that's visual. Let's go to auditory. So people will say things like, oh, that's clear as a bell now, right? Thanks for clearing it up for me. Holding my tongue. I gave them an earful, or she gave me an earful. I got tongue-tied. Word for word. There's in a manner of speaking. Loud and clear. You made that loud. Your actions were loud and clear. So right, they're translating something that they saw out in the world as someone's behaviors a certain way, and they're translating it to a message that they hear loud and clear in their mind. So that's kind of how that works too. And what's cool about that is all of this understanding begins to highlight, and I like the NLP phrasing of this, is that the map is not the territory, right? That's where the word someone uses to describe an event is not the event itself. We are translating behavior to, I got this message loud and clear, but was that really the intention behind the behavior? Maybe yes, maybe no. And that is why it starts to really build upon itself. Like this starts a little bit of a snowball, because listening for this kind of thing also then functions to remind us that the way people talk is heavily dependent on how they perceive the world. So we're all looking at the same thing, but we describe it and represent it in the brain different ways. And that's where you can get off a session or a client call or a sales call, and then they send an email, they're like, you said this and this, and you're like, when did I ever say that, right? And that becomes the basis of helping yourself get some more clarity about why people think the way they do, or why you react the way they do, and why misunderstandings happen, and all that good stuff. All right, so let's go on to K, kinesthetic. So that's feeling. This is like all worked up, all wound up, all washed up. That kind of like feeling type. Pull some strings, an actual tactile, like I'm pulling something. Too much hassle, too much to hold. Sharp as a tack. She was a hothead. That feeling of hothead, and hanging in there, like you can, sometimes people will actually do the hand motion, like in their mind they are representing the rope and they are feeling that rope. So they do the hand motion because their brain thinks it, and they move before they even consciously are aware of it. And so a little clue for kinesthetics, sometimes on the phone you can't see this, but if you're on Zoom or in person, they will move their hands a decent amount, and sometimes they will act things out more. And you'll notice if you're watching the YouTube, I do this as well. Like I will grasp for an idea and I will actually literally like grab for the air and bring it towards myself, and that's how my brain represents that kind of thing. I'm like bringing it and grabbing it for me. And so you'll notice sometimes in people's body language that they are doing things, that people that are auditory oftentimes will move their head to the side and will be facing their ear towards the person that they're listening, or they'll kind of cock their head to the side. And then the people who are visual generally will be looking right at you and have your eyes on you. Or if they're not feeling the conversation, their eyes will be elsewhere. Kind of like how people say, like, where your feet point at in conversation kind of tells you how much you're in it or away from it. And so same kind of thing with the eyes. If they're looking at you and they're visual, there's more engagement. If they are looking off to the side or all around or at, your shirt or your forehead or whatever, then there might be something else going on. So this is the words that they're going to say that lets you know. So then how do you respond? For the visual, it can sound like, if this looks good to you, let's focus on finishing up the program agreement, right? Looks and focus are the visual words there. So auditory, if this sounds good, let's start discussing the next steps. So sounds and discussing, that's a words, and talking, those are the two auditory. And then for kinesthetic, if this feels good, let's handle all the paperwork to, fill in the blank. So handle, that's like touch, and feels good. So by the end of the conversation, oftentimes if you are listening for these words, they're like, that makes sense to me, right? They're talking to themselves, they're making sense of it. So if this makes sense to you, let's talk about the details, because audio digital people generally they're like, it doesn't make sense, so they need details and an understanding of what that is like. The smell and the taste are less used when it comes to, like, it's less common to be like, that tastes good to me. But of course, depending on your business, that's super not true if you have a restaurant. So, depending on what it is that you're doing, that certainly can be. But by and large, if you're talking about information products, more than not, people won't say like, that smells good to me, but they can say that I have a bad taste in my mouth for that. So that's that kind of thing, even though they're not quite as, you won't use them quite as much, because you can't say, does that taste good to you? Like, or if that tastes good to you, let's lick this paperwork down. You know what I mean? Like that just sounds weird. But definitely you can still hear like bad taste in your mouth, or that left a bad taste, or they'll look like they smelled something unpleasant. So if you're talking about money and they're like, it almost smells like they got like, or their face looks like they got like a bad taste or smell, sometimes that's the behavioral things that they'll do to let you know. But of course, we don't use those other ones quite as much. I think these ones that I said are by far the most common for where people start. And then as everybody fills out, there's so much more latitude. Like really, by the time, let's say for people who are going from level 2 to our higher level events and trainings, people who already got certified in all 4 for level 1, did level 2 and got certified in those, and then went on to other things, that's where the way their brain speaks has been rewired to have a lot more wiggle room at the end of the day. Coaches who go through the certifications have significantly more wiggle room and mental, emotional, physical, spiritual flexibility to utilize in coaching. And so for that reason, it becomes a little bit easier, because you can say pretty much anything and their brain translates it to information. But especially when you're speaking with people who you haven't worked with before, or are not in the field of any sort of brain or identity work, then that's where you meet them wherever they're at and you walk them on over to where you want them to be as a leader, given what you do in business or in your persuasive leadership life, whatever that looks like for you. But essentially, you're listening for where they're at. And then if you want to develop it, great. And if that's not what you do, awesome. Just send them our way. Alrighty. So thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. So glad that you're listening in. Check out the show notes for some important links there. We have some good deals going on. And make sure you are signed up for our 2-day habit event in August. That is August 20th and 21st. It is so transformative. People have huge ahas at that 2-day event, and it's only a couple $100. So check that out in the show notes. It's something you definitely don't want to miss, and we'll see you there.